during for young people between 18 and 30 years old to understand what are the international concepts, importance of United Nations work in our world today, and to understand the relations between ambassadors, embassies, and United Nations. So concerning today, as you may know, the International Mother Earth Day is celebrated every year on the 22nd of February. And this day promotes harmony with nature and reminds us the importance of protecting all different ecosystems and supplies of our planet. Let's remember a quote from the United Nations. Sustainable economy systems have endangered all forms of so, as you know, it's really important to use your hands about nature. So we're really honored to host this event with I would like to give the floor to our Excellency, Mrs. Ambassador Valeria Villaseca. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Say. Thank you so much for that introduction. I think it's very nice approach to what we're going to do tonight and what we're going to listen. So far, I'm just going to turn into Spanish, so Mika can translate us on the way going. So, estoy muy feliz, muchas gracias a todas y a todos por estar acá. Es para mí un placer tenerles, justamente hoy día que había un paro de transporte. Entiendo que ha sido un poco difícil llegar, pero le doy una bienvenida y un saludo calurosísimo, sobre todo a el cuerpo diplomático que nos acompaña hoy. Está acá la embajadora de Venezuela, Claudia Salerno, una gran mujer ambientalista, feminista, a quien admiro y quiero muchísimo. También está mi hermana Yaira, embajadora de Cuba, igual hermana querida de lucha. Está Zoila, querida Zoila, también encargada de negocios de Nicaragua. Y tenemos hoy a Omar, representante de la Embajada de Pakistán. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for coming. I know it was difficult to come because of the strike and all the difficulties with the tram and metro. Well, anyway, we want to welcome a charm welcome to our ambassadors that are here. So we have here to Zoila, our ambassador from Nicaragua. And then we have here our ambassador from Venezuela. Thank you so much for being here. And Omar, that is also joining us. So we're going to continue. Okay, yes, he's from Cuba. Yeah.
Sorry, it was my fault because I talked too fast. I'm sorry. Voy a hablar más despacito. Bueno, hoy para Bolivia es un día sumamente importante, por supuesto, para todo el planeta. El año 2009, con el liderazgo de Bolivia, pudimos llegar a tener una resolución, la resolución que declara el Día Internacional de la Madre Tierra en la Asamblea General de Naciones Unidas en Nueva York.
Yeah. So with the resolution for Bolivia, we managed to have the resolution in order to be free of the Mother Earth.
Y esta resolución para nosotros y toda la negociación marca un hito tan importante como darle una alternativa real, efectiva, a la sobrevivencia humana y a la sobrevivencia del planeta Tierra. El planeta Tierra, como nosotros le decimos Pachamama, la Pachamama que es la Madre Tierra, la entendemos desde un espacio y un punto totalmente distinto al occidental. La madre tierra para nosotros y para nosotras envuelve todos los ecosistemas y los sistemas de vida que tiene en sí mismo. Es decir, nosotros, como seres humanos, somos parte de la madre tierra. No hay una división como nos han enseñado desde la parte occidental.
This resolution that you have here at the table, well, this resolution speaks about how we manage to give the Mother Earth the right in order to protect us. And, well, or could you repeat the last one?
Yes, voy a repetirlo en inglés para que so we understand Mother Earth as a whole, as an integrated whole. So we human beings are part of Mother Earth, and we don't have any gap to divide us, as the Occidental studies have taught us. So this is very important to have in mind. In this regard, perdón, voy a pasar otra vez al español. Entendemos que el modelo antropocentrista, occidentalizado, consumista, capitalista, patriarcal, colonial, etc., lo único que hace, en realidad, es explotar a la madre tierra y al planeta pensando que es un bien más.
Well, this system that is consumist, patriarchalist, and the only thing that is doing this system that we're living now is to exploit Mother Earth.
En ese sentido, tengo el agrado de poder pasar y presentarles un mensaje que envía el vicepresidente del Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia, el Gilata David Choquehuanca, que nos ha enviado hoy para que podamos escucharlo.
Having said all of this, we have the honor to introduce you a video from our Vice President Gilata David Choquehuanca. So please, we are honored to present you our video.
Es tiempo de escuchar el llamado de nuestra madre tierra en su lenguaje de lluvias atormentadas, de truenos en el aire, de huracanes y tsunamis, de gemidos de los volcanes, del calor abrasador, del fuego, del grito de la gente y de lo que la gente calla por censura o por inconsciencia. La real dimensión de la crisis civilizacional que vivimos actualmente indica que fuimos engañados generación tras generación. Toda la tierra se ha cubierto con las emociones destructivas y dolorosas que sirven de redes de comunicación de las fuerzas tiránicas y dominantes de la humanidad y de la madre tierra. En la sabiduría heredada de nuestros ancestros se señala que a partir de los años 90 el 10º Pachacuti estará al mando del proceso de liberación de la madre tierra y del retorno de esta parte de la humanidad que decida regresar a la gran matriz divina. En la tierra de la Viayana, desde el inicio del 10º Pachacuti, los pueblos originarios caminan por la senda de la lucha externa que llamamos el despertar político y por la senda interna que llamamos el despertar de la conciencia. A partir de 1992 y en especial en este último tiempo está llegando poderosa energía del sol, el despertar externo y interno de toda la humanidad. Si la humanidad entrega esta poderosa energía para que otros nos dirijan por creencia en seres superiores, por el miedo, por la incapacidad de gobernarnos e integrarnos con soberanía, ciertamente la humanidad entrará en una de las peores tiranías que el universo ha conocido jamás. Para estos tiempos difíciles, la sabiduría ancestral aconseja conectar con la verdad interna, con el ajayo individual y comunitario, donde la libertad guarda su semilla. La libertad del ajayo es la energía natural del vivir bien y es la base de una nueva conciencia de la cultura de la vida. Las fuerzas de la naturaleza visible de la madre tierra replican los mensajes de las fuerzas invisibles del cosmos. Estas fuerzas nos hacen comprender que este es el momento de revelarnos y lanzarnos a trascender la lógica divisoria, la división y la dualidad, donde el principio de complementariedad ha sido vulnerado, de disolver las leyes que comunican a las fuerzas tiránicas y destructivas de la humanidad y de la madre tierra. Necesitamos formar guerreros del arco iris, hermanos de la panaca pachacuti, seres íntegros capaces de trascender la división y la dualidad, donde el principio de complementariedad ha sido vulnerado. Seres capaces de utilizar la dialéctica ancestral para restablecer la complementariedad, el equilibrio y la armonía en el mundo dividido y aterrorizado que nos ha tocado vivir. Necesitamos crear la Alianza Universal de los Defensores de la Vida, capaces de asumir el papel de hijos de la Madre Tierra y del Sol, conscientes de su ADN luminoso, movido por el gran espíritu de la vida. En esta última década, los pueblos originarios del mundo hemos conseguido visibilizar el paradigma cosmobiocéntrico de la Madre Tierra y hemos posicionado la necesidad de reencuentro con la Madre Tierra y con la cultura de la vida. En este Día de la Madre Tierra, les deseo todo el coraje y la sabiduría que necesitan para romper con los patrones de comportamiento que ya dejaron de servir. Las fuerzas ecocidas desconocen que el amor por la Madre Tierra va a ganar, porque es una energía indestructible. Volveremos a aprender a convivir con la Madre Tierra. Es tiempo de sentir el latir de nuestra Madre Tierra y regresar a las leyes de origen, a las leyes de la naturaleza. Que el dolor de nuestros semejantes no nos sea indiferente. Que el llanto de las montañas al perder sus nevados sea consentido. Que el sufrimiento de los árboles que son talados y cercenados conmueva nuestros corazones. Que el dolor de los ríos contaminados que fluyen sin vida nos conmueva y inspira acciones sanadoras. Que la tragedia, la extinción masiva de animales y plantas en su manipulación genética no nos sean indiferentes. No seamos indolentes ante los ecosistemas que los depredadores convierten en ideales. El 10º Pachacuti va por los ecocidas que matan la vida de los océanos, cubriéndolos con la basura plástica y espacial. Recuerden actuar siempre con el corazón. Que la Madre Tierra, el Sol y el Espíritu se encargarán del resto. Jayaya, inquebrantable. Jayaya a los pueblos del mundo. Jayaya Pachamama.
Les voy a pedir. Ahora sí. Les voy a pedir un hayaya, por favor. A la cuenta de 3. 1, 2, 3. Hayaya. Gracias. Aquí, ya solo para empezar nuestros paneles, quiero comentarles que el modelo de desarrollo sustentable o sostenible de Bolivia es justamente el modelo de armonía con la naturaleza. Este modelo de armonía con la naturaleza lo que hace es reforzar nuestra política internacional y nacional derivada de la cosmovisión, de nuestra cosmovisión boliviana.
In order to start our panels, so we're going to talk about our model, sustainability. Well, its name, harmony of nature. So the purpose of this harmony of nature is in order to reinforce our beliefs internationally, locally, and nationally. So we're going to introduce our objectives.
Yeah, first of all, just two little things. Harmony with nature, yeah, as I was saying, it's the international policy and the international line that reaffirms our cosmovision as Bolivia. In that understanding, we're going to have 3 questions today, so the panelists can share their views with us. Vamos a tener 3 preguntas para que los panelistas puedan compartir sus visiones y sus perspectivas sobre estas. La primera es, ¿cuáles son las alternativas al modelo antropocentrista, capitalista, cólono patriarcal, consumista y explotador que está devastando el planeta? La segunda pregunta, ¿cuáles son los pasos que debemos dar como pueblos del mundo para poder alcanzar una sustentabilidad real en busca de armonía con la madre tierra? Y la tercera pregunta, ¿qué pueden hacer los gobiernos, las organizaciones y los organismos internacionales? I think you have the questions already translated in English. Oh, no?
Yeah. So basically, we're going to provide 3 questions to our panelists. The first question is, what kind of alternatives can you give in order to fight the anthropologist consumist system? The second question is about how can we manage to arrive to harmony with nature? And the last question is, what can governments can do in order to fight this consumption?
Gracias. Tengo el placer de presentar entonces el primer panelista, es el viceministro Freddy Mamani. Es realmente para mí un placer poder presentarlo. No sé si está... Ahí está. Voy a leerlo en inglés. So Freddy Mamani, he's the president of the board right now. He's the current president of the board of directors of FILAC. He's an outstanding indigenous professional of the Quechua people, current vice minister of foreign affairs of the current national state of Bolivia. He was one of the main promoters for the realization of the World Conference of Indigenous Peoples of 2014 and the final document. He also promoted the International Year of the Quinoa 2013 and the International Year of the Camelids. The United Nations, he also participated in the negotiations of the International Day of Mother Earth, harmony with nature, human rights, the human right to water and sanitation, the legalization of the coca leaf, the agricultural calendar, indigenous peoples, among others. He was regional coordinator and part of the technical team of the Unique Pacto de Unidad in the elaboration of the indigenous proposal towards the Constituent Assembly. It was the road for the Bolivian Constitution. Also, he was a native authority of his region on the southern west of Potosí in Bolivia, and he defended the evaporated resources of lithium from the Salar de Uyuni, the surface waters of southwest Potosí, the camelids' health, the education, the communication, the production of royal quinoa, the titling of community lands, the promotion of community tourism, among others, and also he is right now the president of the Ibero-American indigenous languages For me, it's a huge honor and a huge pleasure to have him right now with us. So, dear Vice Minister, you have the floor.
Estimado viceministro, tiene la palabra.
Viceministro. Creo que
Tiene el micrófono apagado.
está esperando mucho. Ok, avancemos y volvemos con el viceministro entonces. Entonces, empezamos, ¿les parece? Con Diana. ¿Me puedes poner la...? Por favor.
So right now we're going to start with Diana. We're going to project a video. Well, his biography.
Perfect. Diana es investigadora del Departamento de Geografía de la Universidad de Noruega, de Ciencia y Tecnología. También participa de la red de investigadores en economía comunitarias. ¿Aló? También es editora asociada de los medios de comunicación, Ante y miembro del Consejo Internacional de Journal of Latin American Geography, y ha escrito sobre las relaciones hombre y naturaleza, la geografía de los recursos, las luchas ecológicas y las transformaciones socioambientales desde el feminismo y la descolonización, las economías reproductivas y la crítica del capitalismo verde en la transición energética. Es un gusto tenerte aquí, Diana. Muchísimas gracias por haber llegado y tienes la palabra. Si quieres...
So Diana Vela Almedia, she's senior researcher in the Department of Geography at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology and a member of the Community Economics Researcher Network. She also is an associate editor of the Uneven Earth Media and an international board member of the Journal of Latin American Geography. That Diana has written on human nature relations, resource geography, ecological struggles, and socio-environmental transformation from feminism and decoloniality, reproductive economies, and a critic of the green capitalism in the energy transition. So, Diana, you have the word.
Gracias, buenas noches. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación. I guess I'll switch to English. I'm very grateful for the invitation. For me, Bolivia, it's a pleasure because for Bolivia is very dear to me, and also the several proposals that have emerged from this country have been really inspiring, and also proposals that generate a lot of radical emancipatory thoughts for discussion and ideas on how we relate to nature or within nature, and how we can actually create a better society in harmony with nature. So the questions that I was provided are very complex questions, difficult to answer, but I guess I'll try to do that a little bit by revising the history of the idea of how we conceive nature right now. And I guess I'll have to go through a little bit back to the colonial times. Because I think through that way we can explain by now the way we conceive nature, and because of this conception of nature, how we have led to the ecological crisis that we're living right now. So between the 14th to the 17th centuries, with the idea, with the emergence of modernity, but also through the colonial expansion, and even more particularly the 18th century, during the Enlightenment time, the idea of nature was created as a separate entity from humans. In the colonial times, I'm particularly going to mention the role of the European civility, because through the colonial endeavors, nature was separated, and it was considered as this wilderness, this space that we need to conquer, this space that we need to control and manipulate. And this dualism then created a separation between the men or the colonizers, and so that will be the saving civilization versus what would be called barbarism, whatever is outside the European realities of barbarism, and we need to control and we need to exploit. And these conceptions marked a separation between what is society, but not any type of society. It was a specific type of society, right? It was a white male society that was a subject, and then nature then was created as an object to be exploited, controlled, commodified, and ultimately discarded. And in that way, we created this superiority towards nature. And this conception somehow has lasted to today. And we can see that through the continuous exploitation of nature for wealth accumulation and the continuous push for economic growth. We see, for example, through the exploitation of nature through destructive economies, the push for expanding the destructive frontiers through agro-industry, through the exploitation of fisheries, oil, gas, mining extraction, and the depletion in general by biodiversity and deforestation. And in that process, the relationship that we have between humans and nature has been transformed in both ways, materially, and I'll explain about that, and also symbolically. And I think this division is important to understand because this is not a natural law. As you were saying, we have different conceptions of nature, and this separation was created through history because of a specific political purpose. And as I mentioned, there was a consequence of concrete ideological positions on what was modernity, and science was part of it, and it reproduced a specific order that has tangible implications in our lives. So the exploitation of nature right now puts the common goods at risk through processes, for example, as land grabbing, dispossession of the livelihoods of people, and privatization. And these processes also degrade the cultural relationships that we have with nature and any other type of non-market relationship that we would have with nature. So in that sense, right now, what we conceive as the systems of production and consumption are no longer centered in the idea of providing the capacity to maintain our livelihoods, and the economy is no longer an economy that is supposed to sustain the living conditions of people, but instead is a system of exploitation and creation of commodities and never-ending growth in an apparently infinite world. And the consequences for this has led us to the current ecological crisis, which we have been talking a lot about that, but it is not abstract anymore. The consequences we are living in right now, everybody in the daily lives of millions of people. So this relationship with nature we see most strikingly through, for example, today the pandemic is not anymore an abstract idea that could eventually happen to us. That we live through the times of the pandemic in this type of relationship with nature as consequences of a disease that has zoonotic origin, for example. And this has impacts on the daily lives of millions of people worldwide, and especially mostly poor and racialized communities. There is also millions of people that have been affected by pollution, by droughts, by fires, deforestation, the damage of agricultural lands, the rising of ocean levels, and heat waves and hurricanes, and as I mentioned today, the pandemics. And I guess I'm referring a lot about people, but I think, again, in this conception that there shouldn't be a separation. People are part of nature, therefore we are nature, so the consequences are for the planet itself. So I guess in thinking the alternatives to this anthropocentric, capitalist, settler, patriarchal, consumerist, and exploitative model, I guess this is a process in constant construction. And I think it has to do a lot with the political dispute, not only in the content, but also in the strategies and the objectives that we want to push forward in creating these relationships with nature that have existed. For example, Bolivia is a good example of that, but also creating new type of relationships that we have with nature. So the current dispute is for this developing of relations in nature as part of nature, and this is way far from ideas of like romantical ideas of romanticism, right? Because it's complicated. Because the idea will be then to create or to question values that are embedded within the ideologies of capitalism and settler patriarchal, racial, consumerist, and exploitative models. So how do we question these values that are what we're being confronted with? So then it is about confronting the process of dispossession, of violence, death that has continually happened to nature, but also to people, and a specific type of people, racialized people. I really like a geographer, David Harvey, and he explains that in the creation of these new ways of relationships with nature, of confronting more emancipatory processes, it's not enough to create forms that are only anti-systemic or that are resisting any kind of system, dominating system, right? But we also need to look for alternatives that are parallel to the system, that require much more creativity, reformulation of people's agency, and recovering the social and also the utopian consciousness within our actions. And this, I'll say, this starts in daily practices, but also travels through different scales of actions, because it's not an individual process, but it's a more organized, structured process of questioning the basis of life, and creating the elements for sustaining the reproduction of life in all its forms. And that ultimately will lead to new creations, new relations in the way we, for example, are related to the soil, to the water, to the climate, to the biodiversity. But I'll say that, or that I personally believe that these alternatives are built under a specific cultural context, and create socio-spatial conditions that are particularly for these specific places, are very contextual, socio-economically contextual. But they all seek to create collective ways of life in the specific context. So, for example, in the case of Bolivia, we have the buen vivir de su campaña. In the case of Ecuador, we have the buen vivir de su causal. In Colombia, for example, they have the vivir sabroso. So these are specific ways, the way we relate to nature should be specific type of cultural, socioeconomic, and historical context that we all are part of. And then the question of what the governments and the organizations, like I want could do, I guess, is important two things. I'll say on the one side, push for processes of accountability, so assigning specific responsibilities to the capitalist system and the corporate actions, global financial institutions, wealthiest and economic powers, and having the main responsibility for the ecological crisis historically, but continue to have right now. So it's not only a process of goodwill, but a process of accountability and liability on the corporations that has led us to the current crisis. And on the other side, I think we also can gain a lot of inspiration from social movements, from proposals, and organizations and proposals, for example, as food sovereignty, climate justice, feminist movements, and environmentalism, the right to the city, big growth in the context of Europe, for example, that are all conceptualizations for the recognition of all forms of life, human and non-human. And finally, because I don't have more time, I'll just say that these ecological relations are not ungender or unraced or unclaced. They happen to, this will produce differentiated outcomes for different people. So we actually have to listen to the most marginalized people that are part of these transformations. So this, just to say that this is not easy, it's not romantic, it's a struggle, and that is also a process of permanent political dispute. Thank you.
So thank you, Diana, for your great intervention. We learned that going back to colonial times to understand is really important. Thank you. And of course, we need to look for alternatives that require creativity, as you said. So right now, we would like to continue with our next speaker. Can you please change the slide? Yes, thank you. So we'll continue with Mr. Sergio. Sergio An is a lawyer and researcher specializing in public policy. Agriculture, and climate change. He has been ambassador of the plurinational state of Bolivia in India and Germany. And additionally, Sergio has represented his country in several multilateral forums and has a deep respect for and knowledge to the technology and knowledge of our indigenous peoples of peasant communities. He, in his turn, has written several published essays on to return to traditional food production system and its benefits. So I'm letting the floor to Sergio.
Estimado Sergio, tiene la palabra.
Sorry, I should turn on my mic. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. Ambassador Yaseca, thank you for the invitation. I thank all those present. Un saludo especial a Claudia Sarreno, embajadora de Venezuela, hace tiempo que no se ven. Abrazos grandes a todos los presentes. If you can allow me to share a presentation, I'd be very grateful. It says I still don't have the function. Okay. Okay. I hope it's visible. Okay. All right. I think there's much coincidence with what was stated by the prior speaker. So in that regard, I'm thankful to be on this panel. And I'm sure that Vice Minister will speak to a greater extent on this as well as the night continues. Well, I'm here to deepen our knowledge on the implications of anthropocentrism and how this will never permit us to lead towards a new civilizational horizon or something that must be done to edify our society into changing habits and cultural aspects that are deeply embedded in us. I think one of the main issues that we must eventually face, and I think it's one of the pillars of what we must deal with, is exactly this. And I think we have to fully understand the implications of anthropocentrism because of that. I'll go ahead and give an in-depth interpretation of what we feel anthropocentrism stands and why it stands as perhaps the biggest obstacle that we must deal with as a globalized civilization. First of all, we must understand that anthropocentrism is a pillar of Western thought, understanding that Western thought is embedded in almost all countries by now. And this goes against the principles of plurality and of multiculturalism, because at the end of the day, it is this pillar that essentially permits us to then understand why we must question dominant beliefs, values, the attitudes that guide human actions, and perhaps why this is the biggest driving force of our day. So, as this, why is this so important to understand? It is not just a concept. It has permitted the material dislocation of what the Western world has understood as non-humans or subhumans. The wild, or what we conceive as nature, perhaps what all societies at one point were obligated to understand as part of reality, has been put to the side. It has permitted us to displace ourselves from nature. We have made it a key principle to differentiate ourselves from all other worldly creatures. What does this mean? It is regarded as the differential imperative by some authors. What is the differential imperative? Throughout the course of Western history, reason, language, morality, civilization, technology, free will was what exalted man over all those considered non-human. Because all those considered non-human lacked or were deficient in comparison. Even Western science today is disregarding some of these issues because we see more and more how deeply intertwined and how much of what was considered the differential imperative is also present in animals. But from this train of thought, which is still very present, we also have something called a hierarchical narrative. What does this mean? This means that there is a hierarchy in societies, in life forms. This has permitted civilizations, empires, societies to destroy forests, plow grasslands, drain wetlands, dominate, create lakes, and have total disregard for nature, with the end of gaining or earning more material wealth. We've killed, persecuted, enslaved, forced all life to flee into the most remote areas of our world, or even to their own extinction, without any consideration. But affecting us, and perhaps part of our history, this has permitted the material displacement of other humans, those labeled as lesser human societies. We've coined them as animalistic, subhuman, savage, something we use so often today, and we even hear our politicians say it. This has led to peoples being subjugated or led towards genocide. This has permitted horrendous acts like the Buffalo massacres of the US in the 1800s, understanding that if you killed the buffalo, you would kill the peoples of the North American plains. This was done in a horrendous manner, as these pictures have shown us, in total disregard for the importance of this animal, the ecology of the region, and the peoples that live in them, the synergy of them all. How we exercise power, over those we consider non-human or subhuman, has created a cultural conviction of superiority. It has become a guideline for increasing domination over everything that we perceive as inferior. This permissiveness of cognitive belittlement is the chief aspect of anthropocentrism. This has led us to perceive women, men in different hierarchies, countries from others. It is present in all walks of life. I have no need to remind people in Belgium who this man is and how his cognitive belittlement of the Congolese permitted him to do what he did in a most horrendous manner because of the thoughts of the day, making people understand that they, the people here, were subhuman. This has also brought on another aspect that is key to address some of the questions that were asked from us to address. The end of limits is no longer a fact. The reason why societies even had limits was largely due to their understanding of reality. They edified their societies mainly through their inner restraint arising from respect towards nature or understanding of it. Not in a folkloric manner, in a very practical and realistic understanding of how societies must function. The city which I live in today, Cochabamba, had strategic planning done by the Spanish that came in the conquest of this region that stated that my city should never go beyond a population of 250,000. Why? Because there was no resources, water, to sustain bigger populations. Today, we have close to 1 million. We have no understanding of reality. The sheer dichotomy of our understanding as societies of a world which has limits is non-existent. So to even go further and consider or have empathy for those that are considered non-humans, respect for their intrinsic place on earth, their homelands, they've been annihilated. Why? Because they're inferior. Inner restraint as people, as societies, is unchallenged. Our monuments to society are men and women that set no limits to their ambitions. Those are the people that we admire. One other thing that we must understand is, as long as there is no need to consider what is inferior, the destruction of these has no consequences. Animal populations, both predatory and non-predatory, have nosedived. We've made forests recede, deserts expand, topsoil disappear. Rivers and lakes thin out of life. Yet, none of these events, and I was listening to a conversation prior, we don't even consider ecocide as a penal matter yet. If at all perceived, present no existential or ethical problem. No one will ever go to jail for these things. That is our society. And those are the structural problems that we need to face. Because all things distorted are the cost of progress. That is the society constructed on the basis of the anthropocentric civilizational model that has now made it throughout the world and is deeply embedded in almost all countries. Thank you very much. I hope it was enough.
Thank you, sir. Just we all know that you have been an ambassador, and so I'm pretty sure that, like, with all the experiences that you had, it has been really enriching for us, and especially to learn that a world that has limits seems not to be possible. And all the things destroyed are the cost of the progress. So thank you very much for your intervention. It was an honor having you. So we will continue with our next panelist, which is Mariana. She's here right now with us. So she's an activist and a volunteer in Ecosystem Belgium. She's an LLM candidate in international law and global governance with a specialization in international and environmental law in Tilburg University. So the focus of her thesis is on the prosecution of ecosystem under international criminal law and its challenge and opportunities. So please, I will let you the floor. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Thank you so much for having me, for inviting me. Muchas gracias a todos ustedes. Es un honor compartir el foro con todos ustedes. Thank you so much. It's an honor to share the floor with everyone here. I don't know if I shared my presentation with you. Yes.
I think that's
Yeah, that's the other one. Thank you so much. So,
Claro.
so as Sergio was mentioning before, yeah, definitely there is no ecocide law right now. And that is what myself and the End Ecocide Brussels organization, we're trying to be more vocal about. So to answer the questions that were presented today, I wanted to make this presentation towards a legal understanding of the ecocentric approach, which is ecocide, and how to make, or how to try to make ecocide an international crime. So you can click this one. So once again, our organization is from the civil society. We are all people, activists, and we are very passionate about this topic. And I think I'm going to kind of answer the questions from bottom to top, in the sense that for us, the most important things that NGOs, governments, and civil society can do is to be vocal, be active about this situation. We have to understand that years ago, for example, genocide was not a thing. Genocide was not considered a crime. Genocide was not considered an important thing. And it was not until activists, scholars, and lawyers called this issue and started to say, well, this is important, this is happening. And we are seeing a similar thing right now with this massive environmental damage. So if we take this idea that the civil society, and we take the power of the civil society and get involved and start to call this massive environmental damage as what it is, ecocide, then we can start involving politicians, we can start involving the parliament, we can start involving many more people to get to the bottom of this and to start to think outside the anthropocentric view and to think more within an ecocentric view. So you can take the second one. Thank you. So first of all, what is ecocide? There are myriad of definitions out there amongst scholars and amongst lawyers of what ecocide is. But I think right now we've come to a kind of conclusion of what ecocide entails, which is a large-scale destruction of ecosystems and serious damage to nature and the environment. It's also in massive excess. So you can see with mining, deforestation, you can see with ocean damage, overfishing, deep seas, different land grabbing situations. So there are a lot of things that air pollution is also, it's like massive air pollution. It's also part of ecocide. So it's the large scale destruction of an ecosystem, which what we are working on as what ecocide entails. Next one, please. So as of today, ecocide is not punishable worldwide. Of course, we have international treaties and international conventions on the protection of the environment. You have environmental legislation. You have in Europe the environmental directives, environmental permits, the environmental impact assessments, the environmental principles, and so on, right? But there is not a specific international law that punishes this massive environmental damage. You have in several countries that they have codified this. So, for example, we have Romania, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Russia, even, that they have codified in their penal code what ecocide is with this definition. But there are only 10, 12 countries worldwide that accept and that use this definition in their penal codes. But there is nothing out there, an international crime of ecocide. So that is why we see that this is an opportunity to shift this anthropocentric approach of environmental damage towards people. So usually when environmental damage it's seen or it's punished, is not because of the damage of the environment, it's the damage that the people suffer because of this damage to the environment. So there is this big gap of this ecocentric approach in international law. So can you put the next one, please? Thank you. So ecocide in criminal law, it's not something new. It's been a discussion since the 70s and since 2010 with the activist and lawyer Polly Higgins making her draft proposal to the ICC on how to make ecocide a crime. You see, once again, this discussion coming up, and you see how it sets a moral standard, a new moral standard, where we are not only thinking about ecocide or environmental damage in a way that is damaging to people or to communities, but to the nature. And we owe to the nature to care for them, and we owe to nature to be their voice when they don't have a voice. So that is why it is so important to have ecocide as a codified law. Next one, please. So that is why we, as an organization, Stop Ecocide International and Ecocide Belgium, we are very vocal and we try to push this law. So as of today, in the International Criminal Court, there are only 4 core crimes. You have war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and crimes of aggression. So the push here is to make ecocide the 5th core crime in the International Criminal Court. And can you put the next one, please? Thank you. And the reason why we think the criminal court, the International Criminal Court, is the court that should take upon these cases is, first of all, it's an existing court. We have 123 members of the court that had ratified the Rome Statute, and they have annual meetings with the members of the member states. And in recent years, a lot of member states have been vocal about including ecocide and amending the Rome Statute to include ecocide as the fifth core crime, which is a very, very new thing in the international arena, as governments and as people are starting to say that they do want to criminalize this and they do see the necessity of criminalizing ecocide. So this is why it's very important for us to push this as much as we can. Next one, please. Thank you. So we have the independent panel of legal experts that in June of 2021, they all came together and once again drafted a proposal for an amendment to the Rome Statute where they codified ecocide. Second one. So to answer the first question, how are we, or how in this consumeristic-centric, patriarchal, anthropocentric system, how do we have a more ecocentric approach? For us, this is the way to have a more ecocentric approach, to have an international court to accept and to codify ecocide, not because of the damage that they are doing towards humans, but the damage that they are doing towards the environment. So the definition that they gave is that for the purpose of the statute, ecocide means unlawful or wanton action committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. So with this, we see that the main focus here is not what happens or the consequences that happens to the communities or the people, but the actual act of ecocide and the actual act of environmental damage. So we have here the main definitions of what wanton, severe, widespread, long-term means. And I mean, you can see here, I don't think I have to say it again, I think it would be a little bit redundant, but what I want to say here is that to have a panel of legal environmental lawyers, of legal experts and environmental lawyers to come together and draft this definition, and for it to be right now a very discussed topic, I think that's merit to it, and I think that there is the shift and how we see the power of the civil society and how we see the power of the people raising their voices. Years ago, no one would know about ecocide, or they would say, or they would think about ecocide as just a term thrown around. Right now, we have a definition. We have a panel of experts that agreed upon a definition, that see what the elements are. So definitely, this is a way for us. This is the way that we can go and to be vocal about this and to try to prevent. One of the main things about this definition and about the codification of ecocide in international criminal law is not to be not only to be punishable, but to be prevented. So usually when something is criminalized, it's stigmatized, right? So that is the goal of this, is to stigmatize in a massive scale ecocide, environmental damage. And that is why the push, it needs to be of the same large scale. And that's why we are all over the world. We have a lot of branches all over the world, because we believe that this is the important thing that has to happen in the legal field, in the international legal field. Thank you. So a little bit of a breakdown of the definition is that this legal definition, if approved, does not necessarily need to break the law, but you have to have, that doesn't have to have the intent to cause harm, but you need the possibility that because this action can cause harm in the future, then it has to be punishable. So you have in international environmental law what is called the principles of environmental law, and you have the environmental impact assessment. So this would be how it would happen. So in an environmental impact assessment, something potentially would be harmful or potentially would fall within this definition of ecocide, then definitely that should be punishable, and definitely organizations, international organizations and communities should raise the issue to the court if they see that this is, and when we say it requires to be severe damage, and knowing that the consequences would cause this serious and severe damage. So, and also the damage is not in proportion to the profit. So let's say that the profit is going to be less than the damage that is going to cause. So, and as we've been talking about, and as we've been, and Diana said, usually the environmental damage and all of this, it's, and the environment is seen as a means to an end, but not the actual end. And in here, what we try to say is that the environment is not a means to an end. It's not something that is disposable. It's something that we have to be in harmony with. So in that sense, for sure, it doesn't matter the profit that the companies, states, or whoever the perpetrator is gaining. The important thing here is to say that we're not seeing Mother Earth, and we're not seeing ecosystems and the environment as equals. And here we are trying to put them as equals. Next one, please. Thank you. So for sure, what we are hoping with this international crime or international crime of ecocide is to have a deterrent effect. So the deterrent effect is that this is the stigmatization of, if something is illegal at an international level, then companies and states will be hesitant to actually be a part of these actions. There are always changes, as I said before. There are many countries that have been vocal about this. You have the Danish Parliament, and the Danish Green Party has made some questions to the Danish Parliament of what is their stance on ecocide, and do they believe that ecocide should be an international crime? And you see also the Latin American community coming together and also asking very loudly for an international crime of ecocide. So there is definitely an impact, and we need to do more from our place as a civil society to do that. So please. So for us, and this is what I've been saying on and on, it's to spread the word. To sign, we have petitions in Stop Ecocide International and Ecocide Belgium. So you can sign our petitions and our open letter, sign up for our newsletter to get news about what is happening, updates on the ecocide law, join protests, and I think one of the most important things is contact the politicians in your area, contact the people that you know that have power. The civil society has enormous power, but unfortunately that power has a limit. And when we start to pressure the people that can draft public policies, that can pass laws, then there's when we start seeing actual change. So for us, spreading the word, using the hashtags of ecocide, starting discussions with family members, starting discussions with people outside this academic and legal world of environmental law. When we start to spread the word to people that don't really know what ecocide is about, then they have it in their minds, and then when it's time to vote or when it's time to actual major changes, they will have that in their back of their mind. So that is why we are trying to push for this spread of the word. Next one, please. And also to get involved. So here is all of our social networks. If you want to follow us, we have the Ecocide Belgium networks. Also, you have Stop Ecocide Earth. You have Stop Ecocide International. If you're not from Belgium and you're from any other part of the world, there's usually branches from those parts of the world. Or if there is no branch in your country, we can create a branch, and that's all about. It's to get involved, get connected, and get this term spread out, so we can start to talk about and we can push for it. Thank you very much.
For a great intervention. I think it was really interesting to see a young activist like you, especially for the young students here, which are here with us tonight. It's a really nice thing that we can do things on our personal levels by signing petitions, by participating in the strikes and all. So thank you very much, and I will let the floor to our Excellency, Mrs. Ambassador, for this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Say. I think just to mention a word, I think it's very interesting what you said. Indeed, one of the first initiatives and the first reflections, for sure, were made on the Declaration of the World Peoples Conference on Climate Change and the Defense of Life in Cochabamba, in Tiquitaya. First 2014 and then 2017. And by the way, we did this here's the declaration. You will have it in Spanish and English at the back and the table, so you can get one sample. And without other delay, I would love to yes, give the word to our Vice Minister, Freddy Mamani. Ambassador, are you there?
Muchísimas gracias. ¿Me escuchan?
Sí, sí, embajador, lo escuchamos.
Muchas gracias. Agradecerles a cada uno de ustedes por la presentación de sus propuestas en el marco del Día Internacional de la Madre Tierra, que al día de hoy se celebra en nuestro
en nuestro país y también en la Asamblea General de Naciones Unidas un 22 de abril del 2009. Se logra que este 22 de abril se celebre el Día Internacional de la Madre Tierra. Posteriormente, en el 2009, también se crea un ítem de armonía con la naturaleza y solicita al secretario general de Naciones Unidas para que se abordaran las cuestiones que tienen que ver con la promoción de la vida en armonía con la naturaleza. Traducción, por favor.
It's been an honor to be invited here. So since we managed to have this resolution in 2006, so we managed that the 22nd of April, it's been celebrated not only in Bolivia, but also internationally. So it's a pleasure being here.
En ese contexto, dos pasos fundamentales que se dieron. En 2016 se creó el Fondo Fiduciario de Armonía con la Naturaleza, con los fondos de Bolivia y la cooperación suiza, y que mismo está siendo administrada por Naciones Unidas. Por otro lado, desde 2009 a la fecha, más o menos se han hecho 12 resoluciones que se refieren al Día Internacional de la Madre Tierra y armonía con la naturaleza.
Since 2016, with Switzerland, we've managed to make some resolutions. In fact, we did 12 resolutions. So this was the purpose in order to find to celebrate Mother Earth.
En relación a la propuesta que ha sido trabajada para conmemorar el Día Internacional de la Madre Tierra, de cuáles son las alternativas al modelo antropocentrista, capitalista, colonial-patriarcal, consumista y exportador que se está devastando el planeta. Y en ese contexto creo que el paradigma antropocentrista, capitalista, colonial-patriarcal, que ha separado al ser humano de la naturaleza, que ha devaluado toda riqueza a la exclusivamente material, económica, debe ser contrapuesto por el modelo, por el horizonte civilizatorio de la cultura de la vida, del vivir bien en armonía y equilibrio con la madre tierra, del respeto a los derechos de la madre tierra, que es la perspectiva y la visión
to the material economic. This has to be
El capitalismo es la causa estructural de la crisis ambiental y climática que está devastando el planeta. Por lo mismo, no se puede decir que es el capitalismo o el capitalismo verde el que va a salvar a la humanidad y al planeta de las múltiples crisis que se ha provocado. Más al contrario, la crisis se está profundizando y va a provocar el colapso inminente de la madre tierra, sumado a ello el COVID-19.
The capitalism is the structural cause of this pollution, of this environmental crisis, weather changing, that is devastating the planet. That's why we cannot say that the capitalism is the one that is going to save humanity and the planet because of multiple crises that has provoked. But on the contrary, the crisis that is being deep, and they are going to provoke the Mother Earth imminent collapse. And that's why we have right now the pandemic COVID virus.
Asimismo, el capitalismo verde está imposibilitado de avanzar en el camino del vivir bien en armonía con la naturaleza o con la madre tierra. Las herramientas del capitalismo verde, como bioeconomía, servicios ecosistémicos, soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, valoración del capital natural, entre otros, construye una ruta que no está alineada con el verdadero camino del vivir bien en armonía con la naturaleza.
There's why the capitalism, the green capitalism, that is impossibility to continue going ahead in this way of living in harmony with nature, the resources and of the green capitalism, like, for example, bioeconomic services, ecosystems, solutions based in the nature, the valoration of natural capital between others and non-others. They are building a road that is not lying in the correct living in harmony with nature.
En relación a la segunda pregunta, ¿cuáles son los pasos que debemos dar como pueblos del mundo para poder alcanzar una sustentabilidad real en armonía con la madre tierra? Desde la concepción de los pueblos indígenas en Bolivia, al igual que los pueblos indígenas en otros países y regiones del mundo, el horizonte y camino está enmarcado en lo que denominamos el vivir bien, el sumacamaña en aymara, o sumacausa en quechua. Este paradigma de la cultura de la vida emerge de la visión que el ser humano no es dueño de la naturaleza, sino que somos una pequeña parte del sistema viviente dinámico, conformado por la comunidad indivisible e interdependiente de todos los sistemas de vida y los seres vivos que comparten un destino común, al cual denominamos madre tierra. El vivir bien, por tanto, no se reduce al vivir bien de unos pocos, sino al vivir bien de todos, no solo de humanos, sino también de todo lo que tiene la vida en el planeta.
In relation to the second question, which is what are the steps in order to that we can give as people, as human beings, in order to fight this sustainability and look the harmony with the Mother Earth. We have seen that since from the connection of indigenous peoples in Bolivia to the other indigenous peoples in other countries, in other regions of the world, the horizon and the way that is being marked or highlighted in what we denominated living well, or Sumacamaña and Sumacausa. This is the paradigm to the culture of life. This vision emerged that the human being is not the owner of the Mother Earth, of nature. That's the opposite. It's that we are a little small part of the system that is conformed to the community, and that's why we are the living wills. We are the human beings, that we are sharing the nature, so we have a same destiny that we need to fight for the Mother Earth, for the well-being.
La Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible prevé un mundo en que la humanidad viva en armonía con la naturaleza y en el que se proteja la vida silvestre y otras especies vivas. Únicamente un cambio de paradigma nos puede llevar a lo ansiado, nuestra madre tierra, cuya historia y procesos de generación de la vida anteceden y van más allá de la existencia misma de la humanidad, de la cual debemos aprender para recuperar nuestro eje, nuestro horizonte y nuestro camino.
Our purpose to the year of 2030, in order to look the sustainability development and prevent a world in which humanity lives in harmony with nature, in which the wildlife protects other species, and not only a change of paradigm can can direct us to our Mother Earth, which history and process of the regeneration to the life, they go forward, and we need to learn to respect our balance. We need to learn to know which is our horizon and which is our way, which is our path.
Es importante que trabajemos para promover la protección y regeneración del medio ambiente y bosques, los recursos de la biodiversidad y de las áreas protegidas, enfatizando en acciones de resiliencia, formulando e implementando políticas públicas, planes, normas, programas, proyectos para el aprovechamiento sustentable de los recursos naturales, para proteger la biodiversidad, articulando de forma sostenible con los procesos productivos y el desarrollo social de los pueblos indígenas en coordinación con los mismos.
It is essential that we work together in order to promote the protection and regeneration of the environmental and the forest and the resources of the biodiversity and the protected areas, highlighting the actions to resiliency and implementing policies, well, general policies, plans, norms, programs, and projects in order to take advantage of these natural resources to protect our biodiversity in a sustainability way.
La temporalidad de los ciclos naturales, la complementariedad de las especies, el equilibrio de los componentes, la capacidad de generación, entre otros, forman parte de aquellos mensajes que traemos grabados en nuestras células, pero que a raíz de la fuerza de las estructuras sociales de la modernidad, muchos de nosotros hemos olvidado.
The temporality of these natural cycles, the complementarity of species, the balance of components, and the capacity of regeneration between, among others, they are, yes, they, pardon, yeah. They are part of our message that we bring up to you. We have saved this message in ourselves, but because of the root that is the structures society force of this modernity, of these nowadays actions, a lot of us, we have forgotten our roots, which is our purpose in this life.
En relación a la pregunta 3, ¿qué pueden hacer los gobiernos, las organizaciones y organismos internacionales? Aquí es importante mencionar que los gobiernos, como en el caso de nuestro país, Bolivia, para avanzar y concretar estos cambios, hemos aprobado la ley de los derechos de la madre tierra, que reconoce los derechos a la vida, a la diversidad de la vida, al agua, al aire limpio, al equilibrio, a la restauración, a vivir libre de contaminación.
In relation to the third question, which is, it is important here to mention that here our government in Bolivia, which is the case of Bolivia, of course, in order to go ahead and concrete these ways, we have approved the Mother Earth Rights Law that recognizes the next rights. The right to life, the right to diversity to life, the right to water, to a clean air, the right to a balance, to the respiration, and the right to live free of pollution.
Tenemos la ley marco de la madre tierra y desarrollo integral para vivir bien, que tiene por objetivo establecer la visión y los fundamentos de desarrollo integral en armonía y equilibrio con la madre tierra para vivir bien, garantizando la continuidad de la capacidad de regeneración de los componentes y sistemas de vida de la madre tierra. De esta manera permite la recuperación y fortalecimiento de los saberes locales y conocimientos ancestrales en el marco de la complementariedad de derechos, obligaciones y deberes, así como los objetivos del desarrollo integral como medio para lograr el vivir bien, las bases para la planificación, gestión pública e inversiones en el marco de la institucionalidad estratégico para su implementación.
After having approved this Mother Earth Right law, which is the objective, is to establish the vision and the fundamentals of the integral development to live in harmony, in balance with Mother Earth, having guarantees that the continuity of this capacity to regenerate the components and the life system of the Mother Earth, we are going to recover and reinforce the local knowledge and the ancestral knowledge. As objectives of this integral development as media to manage to live well, the bases are the planification, a public gestion, and investments, and the institutional strategic in order to implement this law.
En Bolivia, la madre tierra es considerada sagrada, alimenta y es hogar que contiene, sostiene y reproduce a todos los seres vivos, los ecosistemas, la biodiversidad, las sociedades orgánicas y los individuos que la componen.
In Bolivia, the Mother Earth is considered sacred, and the Mother Earth feeds our home that reproduces, contains all the human beings, including the ecosystems, the biodiversity, the organic societies, and the people that compose her.
En Bolivia, mediante nuestra Agenda Patriótica 2025, tenemos el compromiso de manejar de manera integral y sostenible de bosques en 15.2 millones de hectáreas e incrementar las áreas forestadas y reforestadas hasta 300.000 hectáreas, todo con nuestro esfuerzo propio y nacional.
Through our patriotic agenda here in Bolivia, we have commitment to manage to reach in the year of 2025 the integral and sustainable control of the forests of the terrorists, and to increase the forested areas, and in order to reforest them until 300,000 hectares. And this is our purpose. This is our national purpose.
Para encaminar esta reflexión y consolidar el paradigma de la cultura de la vida que emerge de la filosofía del vivir bien, se destacan los siguientes frentes de lucha que pueden ser concretos juntos a las organizaciones y organismos internacionales, y en ese sentido se tienen 10 propuestas. Continuar empoderando a los pueblos en la ruta de su liberación, porque el poder es el pueblo y para el pueblo, y en esta lucha liberar a todos los seres vivos de la madre tierra que se encuentran bajo la explotación mercantilista y capitalista.
In order to finish our reflection and to continue this philosophy of living well, we have